is America's home for racing, and it is a facility that has seen so many big events over the years, and today it gets set to play host to yet one more. It's the Charlotte Motor Speedway, and it is, of course, everybody's favorite infield road course, the Charlotte Roval. Hello, one and all, and welcome to RaceSpotTV and the iRacing Indy Pro 2000 Championship here for round number 6 in the 4th season of 2021. My name is Nolan Remper with Lorenzo Bonner beside me in the commentary box with, of course, Nico Louise down behind the cameras for tonight's race. So we get set to go racing for 24 laps around the Charlotte Roval, but Lorenzo, we were just talking about this a little bit before this broadcast. Not the Roval layout we're used to seeing. It is that layout from 2018, virtually similar in every way, shape, and form to the 2019 layout, save, of course, for that back straightaway where the chicane is almost flat out.
That is almost flat out, and if you take it the wrong way, it's basically a hole sent to the wall. That's why I say that chicane is the best chicane. And I think you agree with me, Nolan. This should provide a very, very good race in how the drivers mark themselves and try to set themselves up into the final chicane overtake, because you can definitely do that if you take the chicane the proper way and some other driver kind of bottles it up.
And of course, that is the chicane that was used when this layout was first used in the NASCAR Cup Series. And it was more there just so it could slow the cars down and take a good look at it now down that back straightaway. It was more there just so we could slow the cars down in preparation for that front stretch chicane. It only lasted 1 year, though, before it was reprofiled for the 2019 race onwards. And you see, well, look at that Indy Pro 2000 car flying on up and just darting through. It's gone as quick as it arrives.
And
and
I think it's one of those. The track.
It wouldn't surprise me, to be completely honest with you. It's one of those things that, you know, is a very commonplace, especially when you have to take into consideration those sausage curbs. They can really bite a driver out. One wrong move throughout this complex, you're likely going to be airborne into the wall.
Yeah, you cannot take, for example, you see the first division between the front row of the sausage curbs, the blue sausage curbs. If you take it a little bit deeper than usual, you're usually going to get an off track, but not only that, you're going to get launched into hyperspace. So you kind of have to take it, but it's kind of like you have to take 1% of it so you can have a clean launch down to turn number 3 of the oval area. But it's going to be a very, very interesting race nevertheless, because I can totally see some drivers taking like the apron of sorts or nearby the apron, because that's where you get the best grip. But then again, it's a race that who makes the less mistakes is actually going to win this one.
And we talk about this, you know, track being more of a momentum track usually. That is more for the stock cars. Although, when you get to these Indy Pro 2000s, it more does almost become a bit of all-out speed. That being said, it is still important to carry momentum through that infield section from turn 1 all the way up to about turn 8 when you duck back on to the oval for NASCAR 1, also known as turn 9 for the road course. And it should make it for a rather interesting race. Passing is definitely a lot easier on this type of a road course than as we've seen in other places, and even with other cars that we've seen at this Roval, it can be a bit easier to pass. I wonder, do you think we're going to be seeing anybody going side by side into that backstretch chicane?
I want to, but logically it wouldn't be the best move available. But then again, I've been proven wrong, I think, so much in this season with drivers trying to make overtakes that it could happen. It definitely could happen.
And David Porcelli, you just saw, went 3rd fastest on the day with a 109.076 in qualifying. And from there, it's a bit of an interesting one, isn't it? Because you got John Bodefer and Lucas Poppel, the top 2 up in qualifying. And both of those drivers are about 6/10 clear of the 3rd place driver Porcelli just behind them.
Yeah, and more interesting is the separated apart from each other. It's basically 29 hundredths of a second separated from one another, right? So it's really close. They're on the class of their own, and then you have the mid-pack of sorts between 3rd to 7th place, if you want to put it that way, where the level of the driver is very much equal.
And of course, I know John Bodefer is going to be wanting to come on in here and make a clean run for this race win. I remember, and don't forget, in that last race at the Detroit Belle Isle, he collided with Paddock in the closing laps and ended up sending Paddock into the wall and out of the race. Bodefer went on to win the race by some margin. He's looking to get another race win for himself, but I'm hoping this time he might get it a little bit in a cleaner manner. I don't doubt he's probably thinking the same.
He's probably thinking the same as qualifying. He's pretty much over. And I think one thing that is going to make a whole lot of difference in comparison to what we normally see in the Roval is the running start. They are going to launch up like the NASCAR cars would, but Bodefer can dominate basically anytime he wants once the pace car is in. And from what I know, it's just when he gets into the second leg of the chicane is where he's going to launch.
And there is under a minute left in qualifying. Nobody is left out there on the track. And with no time to even get an out lap in, let alone a proper time lap, let's take a rundown for your official starting grid here in today's race from the Charlotte Roval. So, with a couple of seconds still remaining in qualifying, it is John Bodefer up on pole position. Just 0.03 of a second back sits Lucas Poppel on the front row. David Porcelli over half a second back is down in third place with Amadima in fourth. Jaden Thurlow is in fifth with Con Amelia rounded out the top 3 rows.
Yeah, then we got James Watson and Brandon Powell in row number 4. Row 5 is Alex Main and Tobias Ressa. And then Frank Nguyen and Alexander Bishop round out the row number 6.
And that leaves the last 2 drivers to set qualifying times, Alexander Fuller and Shane Holstein. But it is a bigger grid than just 14 cars. You also have the likes of course, Toru Fujita along with Pablo Roldan Huber and Corey White to round out the 17-car grid here today. Those bottom 3 drivers electing not to take times here in this race. They'll be starting this one from the tail end of the grid. So just waiting now on drivers to grid on up for their one and only pace lap before we get this race underway. Talk about some of the drivers coming on in here wanting to have themselves a good day. You'll look over there at that number 9 machine of Alexander Bishop qualifying relatively further down the grid. We've seen Bishop well up into the top 10 a few times so far this season. So overall, it's a bit of almost an uncharacteristic qualifying from that number 9 car.
It has been, but if we have to look back, I think even in Detroit, he didn't get a really good qualifying. I think it was the last car to put up a lap in the home field, but managed to claw up because of how Detroit, the Belle Isle pretty much is as a track. It's very dangerous, so it's going to be real interesting how Bishop is going to move up in the field over here, because he has some similar groups to what Detroit has. Like, if you miss it, you're pretty much in the wall, right? Your race is over. So it's going to be interesting how the number 9 car will fare in this race.
Of course, you can see there is a little bit of a fading sun, so to speak. That is of no surprise. It is currently 5:30 p.m. in the sim time, so we are going to be racing into the evening. Not late enough that we're going to have the lights come on, and that would be a good thing as well, because on the road course, there are no lights in the infield section, and these cars don't exactly have headlights. Where would you put them, right? So we will be racing into the evening, but not late enough they'll be racing under the lights. That does mean, though, the track temperature is relatively cold at the moment. Only 79 degrees Fahrenheit, among the lowest temps we've seen all season long. Only 77 in the air, and the winds off to the southwest by about 6 miles an hour.
You see now in degrees, that is 25 on the ambient, 26 on track. But I think the big difference here is that the abrasiveness of the track is not going to kill the tires way too much. The thing is, it might take a little bit longer for them to build up the heat, right? Normally, it takes right about 2 laps to 2 laps and a half, or even 1 lap and a half, depending on how hot it is, track, for you to get the tires properly heated up and then get some consistent laps. Over here, because you have such a fast section of turns, the car will get a little bit wobbly and loose, especially maybe into turn number 3, where things can get very dangerous if you're side by side.
You're right on board one of these drivers further down the field on this one and only pace lap before we get things underway. That was, of course, Alexander Bishop. See that iRacing safety car leading them out through this infield section and through turn 8, which will take them back on to the NASCAR oval for NASCAR turn 1, aka turns 9 and 10. Turn 10 is over at NASCAR 2, which is usually turn 2 leading on to the back straightaway. Before, of course, you got that back stretch chicane as well, which, as we talked about before, it kind of mimics the bus stop chicane from Watkins Glen in many ways in terms of its shape, but it's a lot higher speed. I think it's worth noting.
It's totally higher speed. You can go up to 5th gear, maybe downshift into a short fourth and shift back up to 5th and launch yourself. Now, I have a question. Quick question. Do you want to see someday the full usage of the Roval being used? Because there's still more length into the Roval, especially when you're about to go into the oval section. There's a little bit of a stretch you can go over there as well.
I think it depends on what car is being used. If it's like a bit of a faster car, I would say no, because it would be impossible to pass anywhere. But make it a slower club car series, yeah, I wouldn't mind. Yeah.
Like this, for example?
I think these are still a bit too quick, but I don't know. Maybe some
Okay.
skippies.
Okay, fair point.
So coming around through what will be, of course, NASCAR 3 and 4, and on the track map 13 and 14 here for the Roval. And that just leaves, of course, 3 more bends, 2 of them making up that front stretch chicane. It will be in the hands of John Bodefer, and expect an early launch as the pace car pulls down the pit road. This chicane is perfect for getting a good launch from the rest of the field very early on. Wait on that Alpine geodesic racing machine, and just there, you saw it perfectly, off and away by a mile towards turn number 1, and it's a top 2 breakaway.
And I'm not surprised at all that Bodefer launches himself over there. Now everybody trying to cycle themselves, going to turn number 1 and 2. Now that's where it gets dangerous. This is your side-by-side over here. There's a little bit of a banking. The car can get really loose during the transition from 3 to 4. But everybody gets away cleanly. There's no major drama in the cars, and there's a little bit of a side-by-side and a little bit back.
Single file it out just in time as start to dive through 5, 6, and then back to the left 4, 7. Watch that wall on the right-hand side. Driver's gonna have to push all the way towards that, because goodness knows the understeer coming back onto the oval is just a killer on any car, but especially in open wheel machines such as these with all the downforce they have. So for the back straightaway chicane, first time today, do we see any major dramas as they will be trying to avoid the curbs at all costs, but just flirty with the edges? Couple of guys do bounce over, heads over the 7 car. Melia has to scramble. Powell moves up a place, and a bunch of cars vaulted over those curves.
Well, I fully expected to see Melia dying over there after launching himself over the chicane. The car even jumps, and somehow, some way, Melia keeps it on track and keeps it also within the draft line of his adversary.
So John Bodefer leads the opening lap of this race, and all the battling is going to be in the mid-pack in this one. There is, of course, no surprise. It's the similar story we saw at Detroit Belle Isle, and it is a similar story that we will be seeing today. The guys further back are going to drop off, and the guys in the front are going to easily pull away, leaving everybody to scrap it out for best of the rest. You are presently watching Jaden Thurlow in the number 8 machine. He's trying to close down Ambedimba. This is the battle for 4th, 5th, and it's got Brandon Powell in 6th, trying to close up just behind him.
Yeah, and it's not going to be very easy for you to close, especially within this draft terrain. You're going to have to rely, I think, on the other driver making a mistake and then closing the gap by its narrow margins as they go into the chicane once again. Brandon Powell, nice and clean. The car steps out, and we have an overtake in the back as Watson moves up 1 spot apparently.
That was James Watson, made a pass on Alex May on the entry to that back straightaway chicane. We maintain the live pictures. Bodefer, no surprise there, logging fastest lap of the race with a 109.244. Expect that lap time to continue to go down, possibly into the 108 before the end of this race. You look back to Tobias Rishi along with Frank Newen and Alex May. This is kind of a bit of a closer fight, one of the closer ones on track. For 9th, 10th, and 11th, you're right on board with Newen through turn 4.
It's weird for us to see Newen again being in the back, right? But then again, this Roval is such a complicated Roval, more than the slower iteration of the track, as there's a little bit of a smoke coming out of turn number 1, but no major drama. And Newen sitting out in the back, a guy that normally usually is the top 5, sitting right around right outside the top 10.
That smoke came from a small slide from Shane Holstein. Going to go side by side to the backstretch chicane. And Alex May had to defend from Rishi. Rishi get a bit close to those curves on the left-hand side of the exit of the 13, but Frank Newen not going to go for the pass. He's going to back out of the throttle, and look at Rishi close it up to Alex May. Gonna look for the right-hand side. It'll be a dive bomb with the left guard up into the chicane. Too deep though, over the curves, and keeps it out of the wall, but May takes the spot back. Newer moves up a place. So does Alexander Bishel as the 11 car shoots himself in the foot.
Yeah, a little bit of a shot in the foot, but the full commitment of Race going right there. As he gets overtaken by Bishel, you win, and May into one single corner. And what an amazing car control, keeping that out of the wall. I surely thought it was going to hit it hard in the kinetic force to cause a major incident right there.
I was honestly a little bit more surprised that he managed to hold on to it as well as he did. It didn't even spin the car around, let alone keep it out of the wall. So many things could have gone wrong. And at the end of the day, it didn't end up being as bad as I guess it could have been. So he's going to have to kind of recollect himself. He's now down in 12th place, but he's got the potential to work his way back up through the field. Look up to Frank Newen. Alex May goes defensive with the run into that backstretch chicane, but has to go back to the wall. You don't want to be offline throughout this chicane. A better run for Frank Newen through the middle portion, though, might give him the sprint he needs in the run towards turns 15, 16, and 17. And just like 11 before him, Newen pulls over to the right-hand side and is deeper on the brakes. May gives him the space, and that's a clean overtake.
And that's a clean overtake. That's what Tobias should have done in the previous lap, but he botched it in the transition between the first leg of the last chicane into the second leg, right at the third curb, and lost 3 positions. But you went over here, smart move, you know, broke a little bit later, but held it right on the apex, and then sealed the deal during the transition.
You're right on board with Alexander Bishel running behind Alex May. You saw Alex May kind of pushing a bit too wide out of turn number 4. Got 2 wheels over onto the left-hand side on the grass down to, I guess you could call the infield backstretch so far. But he's been doing a good job to keep that car steady so far. So Bishel's trying to close in the gap back up to 10th place, but it's not really working for him. But he's actually going to be under 5 of the 11 here, and it will be Tobias Rishi to pull around to the right-hand side. And you're going to see it here. Rishi going to make that pass around the outside before they even get to the backstretch chicane. I think Bishel might have backed out to let him have that spot. Up in front, though, Alex May, 4 wheels off the ground through the chicane.
Wow, and the car's still in control as they're going to go into the last chicane. And no major time loss whatsoever. But that's where the action is at. Everybody else in the field is kind of like scattered out. I think the only close difference aside those 4 cars is Medema and Jaden Thurlow, which are separated by 0.6 of a second of each other. But then again, this is where I thought it would have the most action because it is so close. And look at the jump.
Talk about a launch, not just in the air, but sideways through the air as well. That thing had the potential to pivot around. It landed awkwardly on the right front. That could have shot so quickly on the wall. Trouble for Alex May! And he gets collected by Tobias Rishi. So that will affect Alex May's day. The left rear suspension destroyed on the 10 car. And what has happened? I believe it might have been up and over the crest of, I think that might be turn 6. Take a look at it here, and sure enough, over the lip, right when he gets on the throttle, the back end comes around, and Reese has just got nowhere to go.
Yeah, Reese has got nowhere to go following the same line. The car steps out in its rear during the acceleration. Looked a little bit light during the transition on the crash from 5 to 6 over there, and unfortunately, May got the worst end of it and had to tow back to the pits, and it's race over. Race is going to have to put a new wing, though, in the front of the car. That might be a race over for him, too.
So unfortunate for 2 of the quicker drivers in the field. So we take a look back up to some of the other battles. Down to the one for 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th has died off. How about the battle for 4th and 3rd? It hasn't been as close as the battle further down the order, but it hasn't split apart as well. And Medema, see 5 seconds behind the race leader, but only about 6/10 behind. David Porcelli up in 3rd, trying to run down the 3rd place driver. This is a great onboard shot through this chicane. Oh, just tempting fate with those curves on the left-hand side. It's not so much the other curves that you got to watch for. It's always that last set right before the tire barrier, because that barrier, oh boy, there was even, we were talking, there were whole 10-minute crash collections of just that barrier alone when this track was first released. And they were some of the most entertaining things to watch, but you get this chicane, and the reason why you still got to watch your entry, any portion of being offline almost certainly sends you into that barrier.
Yeah, it almost sends into the barrier. It's kind of like watching ASMR video of sorts. The only difference, not voice, is actually cars wrecking themselves. It's like a therapeutic section, but then again, you kind of have to feel for the drivers that are involved in the incidents because it's not you.
It's such a risky section of the track, and it's understandable to see, you know, why it only lasted that 1 year in the Cup Series where it was reprofiled. Of course, you had so many huge incidents, you know, most notably with that 43 machine. You'll remember way back when, moved that entire tire barrier. We're talking probably about a dozen feet out of where it should have been because of how hard the hit was.
I thought the reason they canceled it because NASCAR didn't have any funding for their space program.
That too. Yeah, but you know, it's always the safety reason when stuff has to be moved, and I gotta be honest, I think it's a good thing that they did move it to reprofile that chicane for, you know, 2019 onwards. They not only made a bit of a tighter chicane and a slower one, so it's not as big of a danger zone now, but they actually made it into a half-decent passing zone as well.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I like this fast one because it is more of a meme, and I like memes, so that's why I prefer that one. But of course, for racing, the improvement they made for 2019, it's like a 500% improvement because it's a very good overtaking zone, especially in these low tier cars. If you're close side by side, and Mazda's is really good to see. But I think more importantly, it's a hard passing point as well. It's so easy for you to misjudge the chicane itself if you think, oh, it's an easy braking zone, but it's not. You have to take it of a certain way, especially the transition on the slow zone back to the reacceleration zone.
I mean, and you talk about how it makes it a better passing zone even for slower cars, especially for the slower cars like the Mazdas. I mean, you talk about how slow those cars usually go, but how entertaining they can race. Even they can't go side by side through the chicane as it is in this layout, which goes to show just how tight of a line you actually have to take if you want to take it at speed.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because for this chicane, you kind of have to go into a middle line of sorts and have to commit into sort of a middle line as we look into Madama try to chase David Porcelli. Whereas in slower chicane, you kind of have to take into a wide approach, ride the turtle curve on the inside, commit as soon as you get into the turtle curve on the inside of the first portion, the first leg. Try to commit as soon as possible to the second leg, to the inside. Make sure the car is leveled out, and then full reacceleration using basically the outside of the apron for you to get a good run. And then a really good transition during the chicane part.
You see just up the road, David Porcelli has been catching Lucas Popple slowly but surely over the last few laps. Take a look at the gap between those two drivers now, down to 0.6 of a second. It was as little as 0.9 just one lap ago. So it looks as though Lucas Popple is starting to lose some significant time to these guys back here. We're about to have a battle for P2 on our hands as Popple going off track by just a little bit over on the left-hand side. And throughout all of this, you can see the sun continuing to set. It is now behind the grandstands on the front straightaway, so this track is now baked completely in shadow. You see, look at Porcelli with the run of Lucas Popple. What do you think? In the run to the backstretch or around to the front?
Backstretch.
And you're going to call it right. Porcelli over to the right-hand side. How brave will Lucas Popple be? He is going to back out and allow Porcelli to take that spot coming into the back straightaway chicane. But because Popple is a bit further down, had to take a bit of a narrow line, he loses time to David Porcelli. So Porcelli will easily take up second place. And now Ambademo looks to close in the gap to third once more.
I'm wondering, can you get floor damage depending how you take the chicane? Because you can take in other cars, right? But since the Indy has some low ground clearance and open wheelers have that low ground clearance, and some of these bumps are hard bumps, you kind of have to stiffen up the suspension or stop the suspension to absorb the impact that you're getting. You get some sort of floor damage if you take it the wrong way, like Melia did.
And I do believe you actually can get the floor damage here. Of course, these Indy Pro 2000s, we just saw it in full force earlier on when Alex Bay had his crash. The new damage model is still in effect. Popple getting up and into the wall. That is not going to help him at all in the rundown Amidema. That wall, usually a car killer. You know, it's one of those things that it grabs your car and it just hugs you along that wall. I know in the cup cars, but ultimate times where I've scraped along for 2 seconds, ended up with the meatball flags. There was so much damage, but that has allowed Amidema to close right up. Looks like Popple just might have gotten away with that, but you can see the time he is losing. Amidema closing and closing, passing it up. Fujita on the bottom side, who had a couple of instances already today. Amidema to the right, and is going to be trying to get him into this front stretch of chicane, but locks up, steps the back end out. It has to back out of the pass.
Yeah, I had to back out of the pass because he had no overlap to go in the last chicane, and Popple just breathing with a little bit of a relief for a quick second right there, but it's going to be on the defense once again once they come out of the Roval. It's all Amidema. He just needs to capitalize on momentum if he gets a clean exit out of the next road section.
We are, of course, halfway through this 24-lap event here at the Charlotte Roval. You still see Amidema trying to close, has a much better line than Lucas Popple out of turn 8 on to the back straightaway into NASCAR 1 and 2. Once again to the right, and I have a feeling Popple's going to back out and once again allow a driver to pick up a third-place position.
Yeah, easy come, easy go from Amidema. Already backs out and stays in the middle line. He's going to lose a few tenths of a second. Popple right there, and Amidema basically cleared himself away without too much of a problem. Now, can Amidema get Porcelli with 11 laps to go?
That is a bit of a big question, isn't it? I remember when they were kind of catching up before, Amidema was losing a little bit of time up to David Porcelli for a couple of laps there, but it is worth noting that Porcelli had the draft from Lucas Popple to work with. Now he does not. He's in completely clean air. Amidema does have a bit of a gap to close. It's about 1.2 seconds, the gap between them at the moment, and still having to work to fend off Lucas Popple just in behind, who will no doubt be trying to get that 4th place back. But I think if Amidema could get some good laps in, might be able to start to close in that gap.
Yeah, and it proves why these last two races, including this one, of course, proved to be, I think, the hardest races they probably have had in the Indy Pro 2000 that we broadcasted here on RaceSpot, because Detroit is a city circuit, very bumpy, no room for mistake. It's either glory or the wall. In here, you have this fast chicane as drivers go by, both Amidema and Popple. And you have that mixed portion, the road portion, into turn number 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. That, even though it's not like any other track we've seen in the calendar, like Daytona or something of the nature that has a Roval section or a Roval layout and it's easier to drive, it makes it hard for the drivers because, again, it's glory or the wall. And you have to be highly technical about it. And some of the drivers, even though they have more of a road background, are probably not used with the car being light, low downforce, comparison to like an F1 or an IndyCar, and then have to contend with this.
So comparing lap times between Amidema and David Porcelli, the last lap by, Amidema was a bit quicker than Porcelli, but it was not by much. It was only by about 0.07 of a second. Overall, it does still look like Porcelli just might be a bit of a quicker driver consistently by about maybe 2 to 3 tenths per lap from Amidema. I have to check what those lap times are this next time by. We'll see if Porcelli makes me eat my words. This is, of course, that fight that we're looking to see if it will close in any further, as everybody else so far in the field just kind of running by themselves. So across the line, Porcelli logs a 109.031, Amidema a 109.152. So as predicted, David Porcelli is starting to pull away with P2.
Yeah, he's starting to pull away, but I'm not surprised. Porcelli has a little bit of a more experience, I think, than Amidema and the other guys in American tracks, given the fact that he's part of the IndyCar community, and IndyCar community usually run more the American back tracks than the European ones. So I think that experience brings it out on the track and makes the number 3 driver be more ready than Amidema. Of course, not taking them skills away, but if we have to make a little bit of a tell of the tape, the advantage on the long run goes to Porcelli, in my opinion, of course.
Under 10 laps to go here, and you can see them still ducking and weaving their way through that ever treacherous back straightaway chicane. And so far, Amadema still not able to close up nearly as much as he needs to in an effort to try to run down David Porcelli to maybe pick up a P2 spot. We ride on board with Amadema, attempting fade through that front stretch chicane. This time by, though, 0.2 quicker than David Porcelli. So Porcelli bottling a couple of the corners, it would seem, in possibly the middle section of his last lap, and that allows Medema to close in just a bit, but with about 1.6 seconds still between them, you wonder if it's going to be enough.
It's going to be a little bit tricky for Medema to close by and contend for the position. And we saw the interesting aspect of the blinds. You see Porcelli being a little bit more wide into the entry and then committing the hardest he can into the apex, and Medema taking a little bit of more of a inner line, about a few inches to the inner portion of the track than Porcelli does. I don't know if that make him lose time in the long run, and that's why Porcelli is a little bit better on sector 2 than 3. But it's those interesting lines that I like to watch around the track and break it all down.
So once again, wait for Porcelli to come across the line. Porcelli loses more time, this time to the front stretch chicane. Got a really bad line, and that allows Medema to close in by about another 1/10.5. So the gap is slowly starting to come down. Although that being said, it's still 1.1 seconds between them, and you wonder just how much it's going to take for Medema to get back past David Porcelli and pick up the second place. I still don't think he's going to necessarily be close enough to have any kind of reasonable look, but I guess you never know.
Yeah, all it takes is one chicane.
Indeed, and Porcelli has been kind of making a couple of mistakes, particularly around that front straightaway chicane. Seems to me he kind of misses the apex on the first cut back to the right before you go back to the left for the final corner on the racetrack. And of course, that compromises your line throughout the entire chicane, along with a brief stint down the front straightaway. So Porcelli has got some work to do on the front stretch chicane. And Medema also a bit of a tighter line through the back stretch chicane. So it seems to me the two chicanes is when Medema closes up all the time. Porcelli tries to pull that gap out, though, again, in the first and middle portions of the racetrack through that whole infield section.
You know, we attribute that for setups, though, because basically this is a one setup track of sorts. Maybe Porcelli is running more wing and getting that advantage in the section sector number 2, or Medema is getting the advantage on sector 3.
It could be an issue of driver as well. You could have, two different drivers. Maybe he's not as confident trying to attack the curbs as much throughout those two chicanes, and that's why we keep on seeing some smaller mistakes. Now, Amadema, I will say, has been the more consistent of these two drivers. Has been at around the 109.2 so far throughout this race. Porcelli kind of fluctuating between the 109.1s to the 109.4s. But the last lap by, Porcelli did log a quicker lap by about half a tenth again, a 195 to a 230 for Amadema. So, again, it kind of depends on just how Porcelli's run goes, and they are catching some lap traffic, and that is, of course, Alexander Fuller. 11th place going to stay up to the wall and allow both drivers through on the inside. Doesn't want to be caught in the middle portion of the racetrack, I'd imagine.
Yeah, you really don't want to be that guy that might block the line out of a faster car, especially if you're the back marker, right? Even though the gap kind of like widens a little bit between Porcelli and Medema. And Medema tried to do his best, but still right about a second, 1.2 seconds away. I think he needs to be basically, with 5 laps to go, 0.3 of a second quicker, be within draft range, and then, of course, have to rely on a little bit of luck to get really, really close to Porcelli and contend for P2.
1.2 seconds this time by. Last lap through, Amadema 1/10 quicker than David Porcelli. And we are coming already to 4 laps to go. The race has just absolutely flown past. And John Bodefer is once again just putting on a complete dominating performance of the field here. 6.5 seconds just back to Porcelli alone. And there are presently only 10 drivers on the lead lap. 48 seconds back to the next closest driver, which would be on the lead lap. So it's amazing just how much of a gap Bodefer has been able to pull out so far over the field. and you wonder, just how big of a gap he could go on by the end of the race. Now, in the battle for second place, Amadema not having the best of runs that last time, particularly through the front straightaway chicane, and he is going to lose 4 tenths up to Porcelli on the last lap.
Yeah, so that one and a half second gap that now Porcelli has on Medema, it kind of damages Medema's run. It makes it really hard for Medema to have any prospects of getting P2. I think he might have to settle the car down and get P3 at the end of the day, because he has a lengthy gap with Lucas Popple. But Botafour, about him, really good to see him do really well on a broadcasted race once again, because we have to remember he did the IVRA Endurance League this weekend for the Alpine Star Geodesic team, and they had a solid race, I think, until right before I actually went out of comms and headed to Ewan O'Leary and Peter Mackay. That I think the Alpine Geodesic team had an issue that basically put them all the way back in the LMP2s.
And then don't forget as well, just 1 week ago at Detroit, he was, he did get a race win there, but it was under some questionable circumstances. Had a huge collision after he made what some might have described as a very over-aggressive move for the lead. Coming out of turn 2 in the sprint down towards turn number 3, collided with Paddock and took Paddock out of the race as a result. So took a win last week, but it wasn't necessarily, I think, a win he would have wanted. So I think that's kind of where he was kind of struggling from, but he hasn't had any drama so far today. It has all been, just smooth sailing for your present race leader, who has now got almost 8 seconds over the field, coming to 2 laps to go. John Botafour, he is looking set for a very easy win today, and a comfortable one too, with nobody he has to worry about.
And nobody whatsoever. If he wants, he can basically lift and coast through the chicane and have no problem whatsoever, because he built up such a huge gap that he only loses if he bottles any of the turns. And if you bottle any of the turns, you lose right about 5 to 6 seconds trying to make it back, unless you get a 360 no scope and avoid the wall. But what Botafour basically did is just now relax and cruise it all the way down to the end.
So look back to second and third place, still 1.7 seconds the gap between this pairing. And this is the closest battle we have on the track for position at the moment. The next closest one is a 4.8 second gap, which is currently between Jaden Thurlow and Brandon Powell for 5th and 6th. So this is definitely the one to watch, because this is one of those things where if you make a mistake, it could almost certainly mean the swap position, but elsewhere in the field, you could probably afford to make 1 or 2 mistakes, miss an apex or 2, and you'll still be fine.
Yeah, I think this is the only battle, I think, in terms of pressure that a driver needs to be basically on the marks every single lap and don't get worried about the driver behind you making the effort of getting closer, because nearly 2 seconds is a comfortable margin right now. But I think Medema had a really good lap right now, because the gap shortened out to about a second.
It was a bit of a bad run on the last lap by Porcelli. Logged 1:09.588, Medema with the 1:09.124. That's dropped the gap down to 1.1 seconds, but that still is not going to be enough to close in the gap before the end of this race. So it's one of those gaps. We'll keep an eye on it, but unless there are any major issues coming through these 2 backstretch chicanes, I don't think Porcelli is going to have any trouble in keeping up with the second place finish. John Botafour, meanwhile, is coming around through that backstretch chicane for the final time today, and now just has that front stretch one that he's got to worry about on the night. And tell you what, for Botafour, it has been a solid run for him so far tonight. He will come around through the front straightaway chicane final time, and he's got more than enough time to worry about it. John Botafour wins another one here at the Charlotte Roval.
Good job from the Alpine Star Geodesic driver, and looks like that Porcelli will be able to retain P2. Medema will get 3rd place, and Botafour with the fastest lap of the race in the final lap. Lucas Popple will cycle out in 4th place, with Jaden Thurlow in 5th, apparently. And what is interesting for me is that Porcelli nearly busted his P2, because once he was coming out of the Roval, his car got so loose on the entry to the oval part that I had to basically go on the accelerator very early to avoid them to get really closer.
And the gap only ended up being about half a second between them at the line, which goes to show just how close these battles can end up being. And you can see the last few drivers just trying to work their way across the line. The last driver will be the number 17 machine, who's just coming around through NASCAR 3 and 4 at the moment. So it's been a solid run so far throughout, a lot of the guys up in the field. It's been a very quiet race. There hasn't really been any major incidents apart from Alex Bay's big shunt earlier on that, of course, took out that number 11 car as well. But other than that, this has been a race that I don't think anybody will be able to complain about. Not the most noteworthy races, but certainly not one to complain about as well. So with all the cars across the line, let's take a look at your official post-race results here from the Charlotte Roval. It is John Bodever taking home yet another race victory. Lost count by now on how many laps how many races he's been able to win, with David Porcelli down in second place, Ambidema in third, Lucas Popple fourth, Jaden Thurlow in fifth, Brandon Powell 6th, Connor Melia 7th, James Watson in 8th with Frank Newen in 9th, Alexander Bishop, final car in the lead lap, down in 10th place. And that, of course, is going to leave 11th place driver of Alexander Fuller, 1 lap down in P11 with Toru Fujita in 12th. 2 laps down, 3 down is Tobias Urishi, collected in an incident with Alex Bay. Alex Bay himself is 5 laps down in 14th place. Shane Holstein not finishing the race. He is in 15th place. And then you have Pablo Holden Hubert along with Corey White. Neither driver even making it to the green flag. So that is going to be it then here from the Charlotte Roval. But overall, while it was a quiet race, it was still a clean race, and I think that's one thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, it was a clean race, given the fact that Charlotte isn't a track that provides a lot of attrition. I think in the higher tiers, right? It's if we see GTs, cars are going side by side. If we see NASCARs, the NASCAR cars are rubbing doors. So it was a very clean race. I'm very surprised with how the cars kept themselves pretty much clean from the start to finish.
And you look over into the next race as well, and I have a feeling next week's race is not going to be nearly as clean as this one was. It's the Worldwide Technology Raceway, a 1.3 mile oval. Not nearly as going to be excited as the high banks of the Charlotte Oval a few weeks back, but it has its own moments that we can always look forward to.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting race. We broadcasted that last season. It was a very interesting race, I think, in the middle. We had a very interesting battle in the lead positions. I think top 3, and especially P2 and P3 and P4, we had some really good battles. I think Sykes broke away at the last second. So it's going to be a very interesting race because we don't have Sykes. We have Bodefor. Bodefor is a very decent oval driver. But because it is oval Worldwide Technology Raceway, we might see some new faces that we saw in the Charlotte race at week 3. Come back to this race because it is an oval track. You're not using your road license, you're using your oval license, so that makes a difference.
And then, of course, just 1 week from then, you, of course, have Mount Panorama over at Bathurst in Australia. I very rarely get to call races over at Bathurst. I even rarer get to call open wheel races at Bathurst. So that is a track that is designed for probably anything but cars like these, but that only means we could be in it for good things. It's a 50-lap race at Bathurst, and I gotta be honest, I think that's the race I'm looking forward to the most so far.
It's going to be a very interesting race in the calendar. Bathurst actually opens up in iRacing, kind of like the Bathurst 1000 season. Not in iRacing because we've done the L1000. We broadcasted that a few weeks ago. But I think that opens up the real one because the real one is in the 30th of November. But the one I'm looking for the most of the remainder ones has to be Suzuka, which is a track that I dearly love, even though it's not easy to race.
So 3 races coming on up, an oval followed by 2 road courses in the Pacific, and all 3 races are going to be tracks you do not want to miss here on RaceSpotTV. But for now, from the Charlotte Roval, it is time to say farewell from the iRacing Indy Pro 2000 Championship presented by Cooper Tires. I'm Enola Rempel with Lorenzo Bonda beside me in the commentary box, and Hugo Louise down behind the cameras for tonight's race. Thank you for joining us for more Friday Night Open Wheel Racing. We'll see you all next week in Worldwide Technology Raceway.